Right. Shall we get started?
Let's go. On this beautiful spring day in Amsterdam. Good morning, San Francisco as well, or California. We're going to be in California in late June, so keep you posted. You guys are very well color coordinated.
Yes, on purpose.
I didn't have the time to bring out my spring gear yet. Business at Zeta Alpha is going very well. Pretty busy. So I'm Jakub Several, founder of Zeta Alpha and regular host here with...
Everyone, my name is Dinos, also a regular host, research at Zeta Alpha. And we have a special guest for this edition.
Yes, I'm Arthur. I am also a researcher here at Zeta Alpha. My first time here. Happy to be here.
Okay, it's the first time on the show?
Yes.
Welcome.
Thanks.
I hope not the last time.
Let's hope not.
So let's look what we have for May trends in AI by Zeta Alpha for May 2025. What's trending in AI?
Well, I think this has been a really intense month with releases, model releases. There's been a lot of gossip as well around some releases not going too well or going too well, exceedingly too well.
I hear Meta has a new AI chief very recently, Rob Ferguson, who was there as a founder in 2014 back. They had some trouble with the releases as well.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to head into that. And you know what's really trending in May 2025 in AI?
What is?
MCP. Again.
MCP is back.
It's the 7th month now that MCP is trending. It's a genius move by Anthropic. Let's try to avoid it. We've talked about it many times before. So we have many model releases, papers, especially today in kind of in the application area, right?
Mm-hmm.
So our special focus topic for today is evals. So AI systems are getting smarter and smarter, and it's getting harder and harder to measure how good they actually are. And especially if you're building kind of more complex systems, agents in companies, evaluation is really key. So let's dive right into it. That's also why we have Arthur on the show, because he's our evals master at Zeta Alpha, of course.
Been doing it for a while.
So what do we have?
Right. We'll start, as always, with model releases. And this month, I will say I've seen some models that people will probably, if they've not caught up lately, they'll see a big jump in intelligence and capabilities. So let's start right away with what we've seen from Google, who has been maintaining the lead quite confidently, I would say. So
1 week to Google I/O, and they released a new, flashy, shiny model.
Right. So first, let's start with Gemini 2.5 Flash, which they released, I believe, in the beginning of the month. This is kind of on their path to dominating the Pareto frontier in terms of intelligence and cost. So this new Flash model, as we can see in the benchmark numbers, is pretty comparable with O4 Mini, it's on a 3.5, and all of these competitor models, though it's much cheaper and performs better for the cost. It's also a hybrid model. I think it's their first hybrid model that can either do reasoning or not, depending on the parameter that you pass to it. And yeah, I think as they show here, they managed to do it really well, where when you allocate more compute and more inference tokens, the intelligence or the performance in these benchmarks goes up. And more recently, which is a model that I am really excited for, they also released Gemini 2.5 Pro Preview as a preview for the I/O conference that we'll have in a few weeks. And if you've seen this chart from LM Arena, the previous holder was the same model, but the previous version, and now it's extending the lead even further, especially in coding. And I have to say, I have used this model extensively in the past few weeks for coding, and it's I would say it's leagues ahead of everything else, at least in Cursor, with the current scaffolding they have. And yeah, we can see this also in this benchmark for Web Dev Arena, where just a new update to this model brought about 150 ELO points higher.
Yeah, so Gemini 2.5 Pro is now leading the arena. I think it's also a testament to Google's natural sort of advantage, both in terms of costs with its not paying the NVIDIA tax for its TPUs, but of course also the huge data advantage that it still has. So doing pretty well. Excited to see what's going to happen next week at Google I/O. What do you think?
Maybe a new embedding model. They are a little bit past that.
Oh no, I think they still have a lead
maybe
there.
some news not from Google. It's been a tradition, right?
Yeah.
Somebody trying to steal the thunder. Maybe OpenAI. I don't know.
Well, OpenAI came up with what they had long promised, which is the full O3 model. And along with it, they came with a newest generation of reasoning models, which was O4 Mini. So in these charts, we can see a few benchmarks that are very traditional now for these reasoning models, which is math problem solving with AIM, code forces, GPQA, the last exam, and so on. And they do show a traditional increase in capabilities. So they're comparing against O1. For those that missed it, there's no O2 for many reasons. So O3 is the next iteration, and it's a gradual increase for a cheaper cost. So then when compared with O1, they show that the model can get better results at either fewer thinking tokens spent or overall just less money for the developers using them. Although still, I would say O3 is a very expensive model. So as you can see on the bottom right, it costs about $10 per million tokens input, and what is this? $40 per million tokens output, which when compared to O4 Mini, which in these benchmarks
10 times cheaper.
Yep.
And then Gemini 2.5 is another Flash is another 10 times cheaper. So big range of differences. And there was also an upgrade to GPT-4.
Yeah, this is 4.1, which I think is a continuation to 4.0, which, the naming schemes get even more complicated now. But this came after 4.5, but this is a continuation of 4.0, which means it's multimodal. And they also gave a different spin to this model. It's the first model that they say it's API first, so you will not see it on chatgpt.com. And I think what OpenAI figured out is that you can't have this great conversationalist and a good instruction following model all the time. So they offer this to developers as a drop-in replacement for 4.0, which is actually a really good model. I have used it for non-conversation purposes. So you can think of function calling or long context and so on. And on all of their benchmarks on coding, on instruction following and so on, they show a significant improvement. So what is interesting here is that this model has 3 tiers, and it seems like 4.1 Nano is almost at the level of 4.0 Mini, and 4.1 Mini is at the level of the previous frontier in intelligence for, I think, again, a drop in cost of 1 to 10. So it's really exciting.
And from the open source side, also a big release.
Yeah, I think people have been waiting for this for a while. It has been rumored, and we know that Qwen is taking their time to perfect their models, and they came forward with Qwen 3. So this is a family of models, both dense and mixture of experts, I think ranging from around 1 billion or even sub 1 billion for dense, going all the way to this huge model, which has 200 billion total parameters, with active being around 20 to 30.
So this is really competing with another Chinese model, completely open source, that's competing also with DeepSeek, right?
Yeah. So we see this in the benchmarks here. They compete against O1, DeepSeek, Grok. So both proprietary and the leading open models. And judging from these benchmarks, again, mathematics, coding, programming, function calling, instruction following, they seem to be pretty near the frontier, if not beating the competitors in most of them.
So a big step improvement from Qwen, from Alibaba.
Here we can also see that
the smaller family models are very competitive, right?
Yeah, so we see here Qwen 3, 4 billion, which is a pretty small model. People can probably run it even on their Mac laptops, for example, with Apple Silicon. And it is very competitive with other models that we used to only have them in APIs like 4.0, DeepSeek V3, and so on. So I think this is a really good model, and we'll definitely see people building on it soon.
Llama also tried to steal the same spot, right?
Yeah, I mean, it was long overdue. I think people have been furiously making hypotheses on why it has been delayed again and again. So Meta did deliver. They have these 3 generations, so 3 sizes of Llama 4, which is Scout, Maverick, and Behemoth, which I think is just small, medium, and big. Only 2 of them are available. They're open weight with some commercially friendly license for some people. And yeah, I mean, on the benchmarks, if we show them on Maverick, which is kind of their medium-sized model, it seems to be competitive with maybe not the latest, but decently recent models like Gemini 2.0 Flash and the previous generation of 4.0. So I think it's a good model given its size, at least on these benchmarks from what we see.
Yeah, but I think more was expected, right?
Yeah, more was expected. It was their first mixture of experts release, and I think it's also multimodal continuing from Llama 3. But yeah, people thought if they were waiting and being beat from all of these Chinese companies that have truly open source models, people were kind of disappointed that. Yeah.
So how does it stack up on these standard benchmarks? Like, is Qwen or Llama 4 now the best open source model?
Well, Qwen dropped, I think, last week, so it naturally has the advantage because they had time to perfect it more. But yeah, it's a bit too soon to see where the community will kind of start building on top of. Although my personal prediction would be Qwen, just because of the open source license, which is, I think, Apache.
Yeah.
It's also missing a small model, right? Because Llama 3 always had the good thing is the 7 billion model, 8 billion model parameter. Now it's missing.
Yeah,
we don't have that anymore.
That is right. Since they switched to mixture of experts, and I don't think they launched any dense models with these. The shift, I think, from also their kind of marketing, they also recently had LlamaCon where they opened an API access to Llama for the first time. Now they're saying, okay, we have the model, let us host it for you, and you can use it as any other model. And it's not so much about you can run it on your laptop.
I think it opens up a really interesting landscape because in the sort of past half year, if you would want to run a local model for the enterprise in, let's say, a Western European or US setting, you would more naturally be choosing something like Llama or Mistral even. But now with Qwen like really edging to the frontier and being fully open, this becomes a very interesting question, which model you pick and sort of where you pledge your allegiance. Is European AI sovereignty going to be built on Chinese open source or on American proprietary models? And I think that's kind of where OpenAI maybe will drop something because they did announce an open model, right?
Right. Yeah.
So just hold on to Llama 4. Time for a little commercial break. For those who don't know us that well, we're Zeta Alpha. We are an AI platform for company internal knowledge, where you can ask questions of your internal documents, of your product information, of all the stuff that generalist AI models have no knowledge of whatsoever. And you can ask questions, get answers, and find documents internally, but also connect to the right experts. And more recently, we have our latest upgrade has been actually to kind of close the circle and provide a fully secure chat conversational mode on your own cloud, on your own open source model, if you like, on your own data. And that's the Zeta Alpha chat mode, which we have launched recently. And well, basically, you can search like in ChatGPT on the web and open the sources, but also on your own proprietary information in the enterprise, and get answers that are grounded in facts that are proprietary to your company. And that was like 3-4 weeks ago that we launched this. We have a lot of interest in this, and we're not stopping there. We are actually expanding it to be a launching platform for building your own agents on top of your own data. So you have all these pre-configured agents, some very powerful, like deep research or chatting with your data or chatting with all the scientific literature. But you can, if you're, for example, a recruiter, you can build your little recruitment agents in just a few clicks. And you can also build very complex agents for valuable sort of proprietary tasks. So this will be launched very soon. Just teasing it a little bit. So this is how you build the internal agents with that little widget. But now that was the commercial break. Back to Llama 4. It was such a good model, right?
Yeah, I mean, LM Arena came forward the same day, I think, in a coordinated release with Meta, and said that surprisingly, it was just the fourth organization to score above 1,500 ELO points.
Yeah.
And we see here it's Llama 4 Maverick experimental, so not even the biggest model, and they are competing head-to-head with ChatGPT 4.0 and Gemini 2.5 Pro.
Yeah, that sounded too good to be true.
Yes.
And it was.
It is. It was.
Yeah, and I mean, I think this is even from their original blog post where they try to show their edge against all the other competitors. They are by far the cheapest model to run, yet it scores the highest among them. But if you pay a bit of attention to the bottom, you will see, if you show us here, they mentioned that this LM Arena model was an extra specialized model for conversationality. I mean, which, okay, could have been just that this is different model that you want to use for agentic tasks versus just for conversing with it. But it turned out to be a bit more complicated than that, and it kind of blew on their face. Yeah, and then when the model truly came out, because how LM Arena works is that they probably launch it as a secret model, people get votes, and then they release it with that score. But then when the model was fully released, it dropped from second place all the way down to 42.
And an ELO score of 1,269, which is quite a lot worse.
Right. And yeah, I think this has gotten quite some popularity actually also in the news with another study that came and emphasized why this might have happened, which we'll cover in a bit. And yeah, then we had LM Arena kind of backtracking and saying, oh, so Meta was kind of not following our policy and regulations and shifting the blame back and forth.
Yeah, so this really backfired, and this is now officially known as the Llama drama, where I think a lot of people inside Meta AI are very worried about the future of open source AI from Meta, because this was really a major miss.
Yeah, so LM Arena also had this very interesting study soon after the whole drama, where they did control. So usually LM Arena has a style control, so just removing markdown and so on. But what they found interesting just by inspecting these new Llama suspicious traces is that they have a lot of emoji and other sentimental traits in the text. And just by controlling by them, they found that if they remove the emojis and all the positive tones and affirmations of the message, this was actually one of the models that just by the same model, just by removing this from the text, it dropped significantly, more so than most of the competitors. I mean, you see that Gemini 2.5 Pro also is a bit guilty of this, Grok as well, but yeah, Llama 4 by far was the one that was tuned to kind of praise the user and say, have positive emojis and kind of spice up the text to be more
And they were not the only one to whom this happened, right?
Perfect segue.
There was another kind of silent release. It wasn't really a big bang. It was just a regular iteration upgrade to GPT 4.0, right?
Yeah, so some happily one day said that we improved 4.0 with improved personality and intelligence. But some people started saying that, oh, wait, this model actually tries to please me too much.
And it doesn't deliver the goods.
Yeah, so what's up? And
well, I think in a world that's kind of at the moment being led by people who actually appreciate this kind of behavior a lot, this is not so surprising.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so everyone was kind of aware in an instant that this model is kind of sycophantic. And for those that probably see this word maybe for the first time, it means that it tries to praise the user, say positive things, maybe not because they mean it, but because they know that the user will want to hear it. And yeah, they quickly backtracked. So after 2 days from the original release, they started rolling back. So this model is no longer available. And they did put a post straight away saying something went wrong, but we missed it. We did not have the evals for it. And after a few days, because people were not really satisfied because it was just, yeah, oops, we backtracked. But then they posted another more kind of deep dive analysis on what went wrong and why did they not catch it and what will they do going forward.
Yeah, so I think they still didn't really fix it. They just rolled it back, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I think this points to a very fundamental issue. I mean, obviously, OpenAI has a solid post-training process and evaluation and alignment and all of these things, but they did not catch this. So I think that's kind of a nice example of how hard it is if you have a problem like this where there are really no evals, or are there? Oops, there was this paper published in the 6th of March, sick Eval from Stanford, just across the street, more or less. Well, a little bit further, an hour's drive from OpenAI, and that actually has a benchmark called sick Eval that supposedly is now being studied very carefully at OpenAI. I don't know if they've read the paper or referenced it.
Well, I would not be surprised if some of these people end up there in a few days.
Absolutely.
Yeah, some new hires showing up.
All right, so that's kind of leads us to our main core topic of today, which is all about evaluation, right? So we've all been trained in, AI and machine learning, data science, and I think that field has really changed a lot, right? I mean, with the large language model revolution, many of us who were used to training models are now prompt engineers, to be honest, right? But what has not changed is that if you do things the wrong way, you end up with the wrong thing. And I think that's, for me, like a really core lesson of this, like maybe the most important skill in AI engineers is actually the deep understanding of what it means to generalize, to overfit, to think about the distribution of the data and how that affects your performance in the real world.
Yeah, we might have moved on from test, train, dev, split if people are not training anymore, but we still definitely need some knowledge of what it means to have a distribution that reflects what the users are going to be asking, and you have to have your test set and never kind of leak it into the model before you test it again.
Yeah.
So on.
But the good old world was, of course, that you had gold standards, right? If you had a benchmark and then you have the right answers, but with sycophancy or any of these more complex behaviors, you're really far out from that luxury. Yeah. So let's look a little bit deeper into how language models and agentic AI systems are actually evaluated.
Yeah, so let's start with a few benchmarks that most of you have probably seen. We see them a lot when companies announce new foundation models. And I think probably one of the most popular ones by now is commonly being interchangeably used with intelligence for models. But in reality, it's a multiple choice question benchmark called MMLU, standing for Massive Multitask Language Understanding. And this benchmark basically is a collection of, let's say, undergrad level questions about a bunch of domains. So it's questions, it's knowledge that a model would know if it was an expert in history, or at least a graduate in history, computer science, physics, law, medicine, and all kinds of stuff. And yeah, what it tests for essentially is, does the model know the world that we live in, and can it solve basic problems that a human with a decent education would be able to solve? So yeah, a good analogy that I came up with was that this LLM would take the bar exam, would take GREs and so on, and if it did well overall, then it would do well in MMLU. But it's, yeah, people can kind of argue if does this mean the model is a good model to use overall, or is it?
And most of all, I think since it's a multiple choice test, it's not really measuring any of these sort of complex behavior. There is actually a gold standard. It's a very classical benchmark.
Yeah, so now we're moving a bit more to current day and age. So this benchmark was probably very, very much inspired by MMLU. It's MMMU, which is changing the language to multimodal understanding. And a similar kind of setup. They sampled a bunch of college exams, textbooks on topics like art, design, business, tech, engineering, and so on. So it, again, aggregates a lot of subjects and fields where someone that was an expert on all of those would be able to solve problems. And what the focus here mostly is to have heterogeneous image types. So you want the model to be able to understand not just pictures, but also charts, tables, chemical structures, musical seats, all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, so basically what MMLU is for text understanding, MMMU is for image understanding.
Right.
This one I see more and more.
Yeah, so now this, because of these two benchmarks, especially for MMLU, models would, I remember, I think with Gemini 1 Pro release, they managed to do a 64 pass and get 90-something% on MMLU.
Yeah, it's kind of saturated,
right?
right?
Yes.
So we begin to need more kind of difficult to game and difficult to cheat by searching online or having a lot of internet knowledge benchmarks. This is exactly what the GPQA stands for, which is a graduate level Google proof question answering benchmark.
So you cannot look it up.
Right. So they calibrated this benchmark by having domain experts in a bunch of, again, natural language and science fields. They collected much fewer questions, so 500 instead of tens of thousands. But what is remarkable here is that non-expert people that tried to solve this, even by searching online for over half an hour per question, they were not able to pass more than 35% accuracy. And even the experts who were relevant to those fields, they did not pass 65%. So yeah, we're seeing models kind of overpass these PhD experts now. But when this benchmark came in, I think 2 years ago, we really had models where it could not pass 10%.
But it's still a multiple choice question.
Yeah, but this is a good thing to say, that your model beat a PhD level questionnaire, right? If you have a thinking model, so yeah, we can beat PhD level questions.
Yeah, I think this kind of leads to this general discussion.
It's a really good marketing for your model, right?
So we're stepping up in the difficulty scale.
Yeah, and we had the humanities last exam, which I think we covered 2 or 3 episodes ago. And I think this is just continuing on this GPQA, just cover a lot of difficult questions where people really need to spend a lot of years from their life to kind of master and understand deeply. But also not just having an impossible questionnaire, just saying that, oh, this is a very difficult question, but also it's a very diverse questionnaire where they had experts from really fields where people were probably not too familiar with before. So a person, at least in this example, with this Roman inscription of a Palmyrene script, I have no idea what it is. So if a model can solve it, for me, it might as well be AGI. And yeah, we again see that the models that are leading and beating this benchmark still, I think it's still on the 10 to 20% accuracy. They have deep research and tool use and coding and everything.
It's definitely not saturated yet, this benchmark, but in the last 6 months, we've seen models go from
5%.
low single digits to like almost 30%.
Yeah.
So fascinating.
Yeah, and a very interesting title for the benchmark. Right, so closing off with these kind of more kind of fancy benchmarks, we have ArcAGI, which the core idea of it is it's a benchmark that's easy for humans, but it should be hard for AI, or at least is currently hard for AI. And as you can see from the examples here, they usually have kind of a grid layout with colors and blocks and kind of puzzles that you solve, usually in like IQ tests. And yeah, as you can see from the new version that came out just last month, it should be pretty easy for a human to follow that. You have the colors on the bottom, which means something, and the model has to figure out, okay, what is the continuation from the left to the right? And yeah, humans could solve most of it, about 60%, by at least when one of them was solving it. But LLMs, I think, still cannot pass more than 10%.
Yeah, so a lot of the good solutions to this task actually go beyond just image prediction or just textual output. They actually write code, right, that generalizes between the images. And that brings us to some domains where solving it in a formal language is definitely more important than solving it in a natural language.
Right, so this is not exactly an LLM benchmark, but it's definitely being abused with these reasoning models, and it's the mathematics examination, American Mathematics Examination, or AIM, and a lot of other Olympiads, either international or US-based, where models are just given the current or last year's problems that were asked for students, which is kind of open-ended, just write your answer, derive an answer, find the solution to this problem. Although we also covered this last month, where it seems that some of these programs might have been also due to contamination. So models that were boasting some high scores in AIM 2024, as soon as this year's problems came forward, they suddenly crashed. So it's still not clear what is happening behind the scenes, if models are with reasoning can solve the problems, or if they kind of memorize it or leak accidentally. Yeah, so let's move to kind of more of the benchmarks where people want to see models being tested on, and this is programming most definitely. So there are a bunch of benchmarks. Let's not go deep into each one of them, but usually you'd have some competitive programming or some GitHub data set of a repository with problems and issues that you want to solve, or a freelancing platform, or even these code IDs where.
So it's kind of a proxy for really mimicking a software engineer, right?
Yeah, in all kinds of domains. I think the most relevant one for most people to follow now is this either Polyglot or other similar benchmarks, where companies that do this code generation, they know what people are asking, so they're making benchmarks of would the LLM be able to actually solve the task that people are asking it to do. And I think this is one of the fields where these benchmarks, although academic, probably have some downstream impact on
become kind of closer to a real application in a code generation environment. And of course, all the large language models are trained of massive amounts of code.
Yeah, it's getting ever more common, right? To use AI-aided IDs with Cursor, Windsurfer, or something. So, and a Copilot, and this whole agentic software engineering aided thing is coming every time more common. So your model can do well on these benchmarks, but will do well in the real world scenario as well.
Yeah. Also, speaking of real world scenarios, multi-challenge is another benchmark from Scale AI, which kind of tries to tackle the difficulties of multi-turn interactions. This also reminds me a lot of traditional IR research with conversational IR, where the model has to remember the original instruction, also remember what the user has kind of revealed in the previous iterances, be able to use the same context all the time, and also be coherent what it says between turns. So I think this is a benchmark where we see
so it's kind of getting close to competing in the LLMs arena, right?
And also being a very useful assistant in all of these ChatGPT-like apps. And I think one of my personal favorites is TauBench, which was also released recently, and people are seeing it being used on benchmarking agentic LLMs, like Claude 3.7 was boasting the benchmark numbers here. What's interesting with this one is actually it doesn't just rely on text, but it's modeling basically a database, and the desired effect is just to see if the agent can alter the database in the desired way. So the user has booked a flight ticket and wants to change it. So after the agentic operations, has the database changed so that the ticket has changed, which I think is a really good way to benchmark models that have access to APIs, databases, and so on.
And it's in this benchmark is the set of tools that they work with. Is it open-ended?
No, I think they have two variants, and I think in both of them it's pretty fine that you have these tools, and just the model needs to discover.
Because I would really like to start up my MCP server and plug it into this benchmark. Sorry, we wouldn't talk about that.
No, MCP this week. It's month.
All right, so that's for
this is an example.
And then chatbot arena, we've talked about it quite a lot, but that's, I think, still the leaderboard that people are watching, right? When new models come out.
Yeah, I mean, people still definitely use it, and every big release comes with look at the screen cap, we're on top of chatbot arena. But people are starting to kind of have doubts on, is it really questions that you want to be optimizing for? Who is asking the questions? Who is rewarding it? Is there gaming beyond just the labs, but someone else?
A lot of this vibe has been around for at least half a year now, right? Every time we talk about new models, like, it's on top of the arena, but
what does that
maybe
really mean?
it's just that kind of style, right?
Yeah,
and it's
and I mean,
not leading in math.
I think interestingly enough, I checked yesterday. Sonnet 3.5 is nowhere near the top. I think even Sonnet 3.5 is not there anymore, but people still use Claude. So we have to ask the question, like, what are they optimizing for when they're seeing a model with 1400 ELO on chatbot arena?
Meta knows. I know that Meta probably knows really well what to optimize for.
That is actually just the topic of this very recent paper from Cohere, the Leaderboard Illusion.
Yeah. So what did they figure out?
I think they wanted to. I think they wanted to be on the arena very high and very very much, but they couldn't make it work. So they started investigating what's going on.
Right, and I mean, I think what they observed is, as a model provider, they wanted to see how their model does, and they expected to get requests to benchmark it against other similar models. And just by reading this paper, what they said is, we saw that we got a lot less traffic than what we expected, based on the principles of the arena, saying that you have to allocate requests to all models. But interestingly enough, just by looking at the data sets that the organization behind the arena publishes, they saw that proportionally there was some correlation between the score and the number of requests they got. So, I mean, this kind of makes sense to me, because you want people to be testing the models that are better, not just any model. But yeah, they saw that OpenAI, DeepMind, Meta, and so on got more than, I think, half of the traffic compared to the long tail of other model providers, open source and not.
So why does that matter? Why does it matter if you get more traffic on LLMs arena?
Right. So what they make, or the claim that they make here, I think this figure is really nice to show it. First of all, if what people are doing is, especially these big labs, they have a model before release, and then they instruct the arena people, okay, send the request to this endpoint, and we'll respond with this new model, but do not say to people that this is a model from OpenAI, for example. So first of all, they can collect real user data that they know is coming from the chatbot arena.
Yeah.
So they can do all kinds of stuff with it.
So they're basically sampling the test data.
Exactly. And then what they also discovered, and which was probably less known to people, and was very prominent with this Meta Llama 4 release, is that some orgs actually can publish more than one secret models. I think we also see it in another figure how many exactly is blown up to. But basically, when you have more than one models, well, you can claim the score of the highest one and say, this model got this the score.
Yeah, if you train a diversity of models, you will have a natural distribution here in this line here, and then it's just cherry picking, right? You're just taking one that accidentally does well on this test set.
Yeah, and,
classical sin in machine learning.
Yeah, and quite interestingly, also this in the more kind of experimental and research part of the paper, they even put the same model twice under two names, but it was the same checkpoint, and they even found that there was a higher score for one of the two, just because of how the algorithm works. Yeah. So if we go a bit to one of the most contentious figures that kind of pick up traffic also on social media and news websites, leading up to the Llama 4 release, Meta was testing 27 models simultaneously at one point. So
it is a bit unfortunate for Meta that Marzi and Sarah Hooker and all the other Cohere folks were digging their teeth into this problem just around the time when they were releasing this, right?
Perfect timing.
That's really perfect timing, yeah.
Yeah, so we see them kind of heaviest offenders here being Meta, Google, and Amazon, and Cohere saying that therefore is just because they were experimenting with it. So definitely they can show, and I think Meta proved it, that just by getting access, this disproportionate access to data, both in terms of an API, but also just testing 27 models, you can really optimize and hill climb this arena.
Right, but what I don't get is why they then released the official model and they didn't pick the same one that won this contest, right? That doesn't really make sense then. Because if you're sampling test data at scale, then you really have an advantage.
I guess it shows that there's two different problems, right? One is a good model for everyday use, and another is a good model for the chat thing that does.
But they dropped on the same leaderboard, right?
Yes.
So that doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
But it's a very interesting paper. It's also a little bit of a cry paper, to be honest. Like, just produce good models, all right? The system is rigged.
Yeah, but if you look at the kind of recommendations and kind of proposals for transparency, I think they all are very reasonable.
They make sense,
and that's what everyone is saying.
So let's summarize them very quickly.
Yeah, I mean, just to make just read off of what they propose is to just prohibit retracting models after they've been submitted.
Yeah. So once you're in the open, you're in the open.
Yeah. Also to kind of be transparent, the organizer should be transparent with how many models an org is trying out at a given time.
Yeah.
Also to kind of, when models are being removed, they should be removed transparently as well and be very equal between open models and not, because they also found that open models usually silently drop more often than not. And yeah, they should really distribute the traffic more fairly so every provider can get the same number of requests.
Based on quality and not on some kind of deal, maybe.
If you have more models running, you're more likely to get requests, right? So there's this fairness applied to the provider, not only to the model.
So this is very much about the the foundational model evaluation, right? It's a big race. But if you look at more applications in enterprise, it's much harder, right? You cannot put your internal help desk chatbot in the LLMs arena. So let's dive into that a little bit.
All right, so this is a very fast evolving field. So obviously there's a lot of competition also from startups that specialize, especially on evaluations.
Yeah, there's obviously a lot of startups. There are even startups now which are completely specialized in evaluation. But what you're seeing is that startups in kind of adjacent spaces, well, I don't know if you can call Scale NL a startup still. I think their last valuation was 25 billion. So they're obviously making a lot of money in annotating data on that side. But they also have a evaluation product, Arise, which is, I think, more an LLM ops and observability platform. Are moving quickly into the realm of LLM and agent evaluation. But of course, also popular frameworks like LangChain with their LangSmith tool, and specialized providers like Human Loop from San Francisco, ArcAGI here from Amsterdam, actually. And Patronus AI are rapidly moving into this pain point of enterprises needing to evaluate their models. So what's the core of the problem?
Yeah, so let's put maybe a more RAG-oriented spin to it. So retrieval augmented generation typically is a prompt with a question from the user, some instructions on what to do with the question, how to break it down, retrieved documents or chunks, and then the model should answer based on the retrieved chunks. But just because you ask it to just use the good chunks, don't use the bad chunks, give me the answer to the question, never doesn't mean that the model will just follow that instruction. And this is what we commonly call hallucinations.
And typically you don't have a gold standard, right?
Yeah. So the problem that you have is that you just got a question at inference time and you don't know, even if you could probably predict what kind of questions the user would ask. It could be open-ended, so you don't have a gold standard for that. There are a few metrics that people use kind of to just generally test how their prompts and how their models react to the information provided in the prompt, such as the noise sensitivity. You don't want the model basically to be affected when many relevant chunks are there, as long as the relevant one is there. You also want the model to be able to respond to the actual question. So just because you get a question in some documents, you still need to be grounded to the original question of the user. And this is what Ragas calls response relevancy. Another one that's very important is faithfulness. So you really need your answer to be grounded in the context and not just source information from the model or any other place where you could come up with information for the answer. And overall, what you are optimizing the system for is for the answer to be accurate, to be true, and to be matching this ground truth if you have it.
If you have it.
If you have it.
Yeah. Usually you don't, right?
Yeah.
But we'll get back to this in a second.
So these are kind of the four main metrics of Ragas, which is a very popular framework in this space.
Yeah, so if people want to get started, because it's very popular, this is kind of their go-to example in the documentation, where you just have the user input and the retrieved chunks along with the AI response and the gold reference response. And you just basically give a rubric to the model and say, okay, I want to measure these aspects, and you turn it into a sample. You can collect a bunch of them and have a data set, or even you can have multiple turns. So it's not just question answered, but it could be like tool uses or retrieve chunks or intermediate clarification questions. And then you just build a sample of it and then get a score basically on how does the model do.
Yeah, so you basically get, for every model, you get a score on all these rubrics, right? On all these different metrics.
Yeah, and also what they have next is kind of you can have your LLM-based metrics or non-LLM with classical kind of string substring matching, and the other categorization is either single turn or multi-turn, which is more and more popular now. And yeah, it's how you ultimately use it is very simple. When you have a metric and you have a sample, you just call it in a Python or whatever other library you're using.
So I'm curious, Arthur, you're very active in this evaluation space.
Yeah.
So what's for in your mind the main reason that Ragas is very popular?
I think the biggest reason because it's a good library. It's easy to use, so you can just drop it in and just use it in your current setup, which makes it super straightforward to just pick it up. And it's quite intuitive as well, the metrics that they provide. They provide metrics that make sense to anyone. Like if you take a look, if you just battle in it and say, okay, this is talking about if this is accurate, if this is fluent, etc. So have all of this rubric evaluation framework is really nice for a human to look at that and say, oh, I agree, or no, I disagree.
Yeah, and you can kind of send it to your manager, right? Like
exactly.
It's 80% accurate, or
faithful. Our new model is 10% more faithful, or whatever. So it's a straightforward evaluation on that sense.
But and I think an important point also is point-wise. So you just need the output of a single turn or a single call to the LLM, and then you basically can evaluate. You don't need to have grander scheme of evaluation.
You have built one prototype system and you just measure it.
You have to make sure that's one thing correctly.
But there are alternatives, right? For example, if you have multiple systems, but we'll come to that.
Spoilers.
Yeah, another very popular library that I found recently is called DeepAval, and their motto here is that you have language models which are now parts of your programs, so you should be able to unit test them like you unit test programs, with all of their accessories like agentic behavior, tool calls, outputs, and so on. And I mean, just looking by the code example, it's also very straightforward and easy to understand what's happening. You just have your correctness metric or evaluation metric. You describe it either in natural language or just use the provided ones that are hard-coded and pre-programmed. And then you just have your test cases. So like you have your unit tests that say, on this input, I expect this output. You also want to test your language model that on this input, it should always have the correct response to the question. And you just integrate it to your testing utility like PyTest or anything you use. And yeah, I think they also have this. One.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, they have. You can have also build more complex cases where you can build a graph that says, okay, you have an input, and then the model should also follow this kind of graph logic in dealing with a problem. Yeah, and finally, we have LangFuse, which is not exactly built on evaluating models, but it's more about tracing and collecting all of the responses of the model, and then you can build on top of it with external libraries to evaluate them with any kind of library that we showed. Yeah, so let's get back to this. What's the problem with having ground truth?
It's super expensive to construct it, and even if you construct it, a different version, different iteration of your prompt or your agent might give an answer which is slightly different, and then blue score is not really cutting it.
Yeah.
So it can be very expensive, and that's why we have also developed an Eval framework, or we mainly Arthur. So tell us about it.
Yeah. So this is what Jakob was saying, is that it's super expensive to have a gold standard, right? If you have like experts who are going to go over a bunch of the answers from an LLM from multiple questions, these experts, they're expensive to pay by the hour. You're going to pay them for sitting down on the laptop for hours on an Excel spreadsheet or whatever interface. And
they wouldn't even do it.
They won't do it.
Yeah.
Or if you force to do it, it's going to be super expensive. So how do you, the idea that how can we work around this problem of having a gold standard, right?
Yeah. And especially kind of in this context where you have many iterations, where you actually have like Meta, 27 or whatever different versions. Yeah. You cannot go to the expert 27 times like you can do to the chatbot arena. So that's...
Bring us to Regulo. Yeah. So Regulo is our framework. Of course, it's open source. The QR code is there. You can please use it, please open issues, etc. We are applying this kind of the same logic behind the chatbot arena to do pairwise evaluation of the model. So you don't have gold standard, but you have 2, 3, 4 different pipelines of RAG pipelines. and to see, okay, which one's better, which one actually improves whatever I had before. And that's where Regulo comes in. We're using an LLM as a judge to basically say, oh, this is a promising direction. This new model, this new pipeline that you have developed seems good, because it's ranking higher than your previous iterations, and you should look into it with more careful. It's not supposed to replace the human, the expert in the end, to actually say, okay, this is good, but actually give you a path, give you a direction. Say, okay, this is a good path, this is a good direction to look into, to continue investigating.
Yeah. So what do you see in this graph here?
Is that we did the two things, right? We actually asked experts to annotate answers, and then we compared the answers with an LLM as a judge. And we said it actually agrees really, really well with the expert. So if you see one specific question, maybe not so much, but overall, over many questions, over many queries, experts and a good LLM, a good prompt, actually agree with each other which one is better than the other.
Yeah. So not so much in the rubric, so not the absolute score like Ragas does.
Yeah.
But actually on the ranking of the different iterations.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. So basically, if the LLM as a judge say, oh, system A is better than system B, a human would most likely agree with that.
Yeah, and that's really useful if you have this sort of ELO style tournament process, right?
Yeah, exactly. So the idea is exactly that. We have this. Again, we are focused on the RAG pipeline, so we actually have pay a lot of attention to the quality of the retrieval of the documents that each system does. So if a system does a good retrieval step, most likely will outproduce good answers. And we use all of this context to actually give a better overview to the judge. So, okay, what is actually good, what is not that good. To in the answer say, okay, answer A is better, answer B is better. And we combine these over time and have a ELO ranking all of these models.
Say, so basically you play games, right?
Exactly.
And then when you win a game, you nib a little bit of the score of the other agent.
Yeah. So if you play a game between two agents and you already kind of know that, okay, this agent is better, agent A is better than agent B. If agent A wins this game, okay, gains more points, but not that surprising. But if agent B wins, that game's kind of upset. Like, okay, this is really not what we were expecting. So it means that agent B is actually quite good, more than we were expecting it to be, have a higher boost in its score. And we keep iterating this over time and changing the scores and changing the ranking of these models to have, at some point, kind of stabilize and then have a stable ranking between all of these agents, different pipelines, different things to have to say.
So that's very similar to what the chatbot arena is doing.
Exactly.
Sense, but then with LLM as an audience.
Yeah. Yeah. So we just, as you said, we pay a lot of attention to the retrieval part of the pipeline, because it's the old thing that if you have garbage documents, we'll have garbage answers. So the Regulo pipeline has essentially three main components. The first one is the query evaluation. The query retrieval evaluation. So
so basically classical information retrieval metrics. Yeah,
exactly. So we have here one example prompt, but we have recently a paper from Jimmy Lin group in Waterloo about the umbrella prompts they are putting forward, is essentially a mimicking of the Bing prompt that they did a couple of years ago. And there was this whole new movement in information retrieval towards LLMs as a judge, showing that, well, it actually goes really, really well against human annotations and the whole track setup and classical IR setup. And we also have this built in. And then the next step would be to, okay, I have all of these questions annotated. All of these documents are annotated. Let's play the games. Let's put two agents, one versus another, with all this context of what's good documents, what are bad documents, and let's actually see how they behave. So we can put
so in that sense, the chatbot arena is for like ELO system, but Reg ELO is a really ELO system for retrieval.
With the actual context, we are putting the context of what's good documents or bad documents. So the idea is that if an agent using bad documents, well, it's not as good as the one that's using better documents overall.
Right. So it's kind of a holistic look at the RAG system. And then in the end?
You have that with all of these games played, essentially, you just, okay, let's actually, a computer's ranking. Like we don't need to be building the ranking as we go. We can just play a bunch of games and then the computer ranking. Do some statistical shuffling, etc., to make it a little bit more fair. And to actually have a ranking of your agents with a needle score for which one of them.
Yeah. So you don't need to have a gold standard, and you don't need to have a rubric that's reliable.
Exactly. Of course, all of these may help, but it's not needed.
All right. So what's the conclusion from this?
Yeah. So this came from actually a lot of actual human interaction, like looking at the data, staring at things, and the boring part of it is that the more queries, the better. So it's better to have annotation on 40, 50 queries to have a more stable number in the end. So if you just have one or two example queries, it's not very reliable to say which model is better, right? You have multiple questions, multiple settings. And also, I think this is one of the most interesting findings that we had. And that's why the pairwise is so good, that LLMs are trying to be too nice. That's what we saw on 4.0 with the psychopathy thing, right? They're trained to be agreeable.
LLM-as-a-Judge, but as a psychopathic judge.
Yeah, it's a really good answer. Very good. Not really, it's crap. It's a crap answer.
This kind of forced choice is A better than B.
It's way more direct. Right? If you say, is this good? If you say yes. But if you say, is this better than this? That's different. It's a more direct thing.
All right. So, I think it's a very cool system, Regulo. Let's dive into the last stretch of the webinar with some papers.
Right. So I think this is very relevant to this whole discussion. And it's a very recent paper called The Perspectives on the Validity of Language Models for Evaluations. And they kind of come up with 14 different problems that may arise if you don't design your system correctly. So this is not so much about the evaluations being wrong, which is only one of the categories, but it's more generally when you use these LLM-as-a-Judge evaluators, where can the system go wrong by actually you not capturing the true performance of the system. So I wanted to highlight one per each category. So in the first one, they say this circularity evaluation trope is when the evaluation signal actually leaks into the system. So they also propose for each of them kind of a guardrail on how to prevent this from happening to your evaluations. So I think for this one, they say, you should not use an LLM pipeline that is very similar to what is used under the hood by the retrieval system, because then you kind of get this positive reinforcement. The other one is on the meta evaluation level, where you can basically just what Arthur was describing, you just disagree on the labels between the humans and the language model. And for this one, they propose that you have these agreement metrics that you see actually on a case-by-case level. Do the humans and the expert and the LLM disagree? And if so, maybe you should tweak the prompt with the LLM. Then on the system level, they have this test set leak, which is kind of very traditional on a machine learning level, is that you really need to be collecting new data and new labels and new questions so that maybe the language model stops knowing the answer, and then you figure out that the system doesn't work in out-of-domain distributions.
Yeah.
And then it's kind of an edge case in the judge trope, where you have this rubber stamp where you just blindly accept that, okay, if the system says it's good, then it should be good. And I mean, here, I think the solution is very simple. Just have a look at the data and see and ask your experts to say, this actually is not right.
Human in the loop.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. That still assumes a benchmark, that paper?
Right. So this is kind of more of a general behavior of language models. But what happens if you actually don't have a benchmark? Like in general, you just build a system, but you don't have some queries or some user inputs to benchmark it against. And this is where this is a very traditional problem in the industry. And this is where this nice blog post by Chroma came called generative benchmarking, which reminds me a lot of InParse, but for actually evaluating real systems. From this top right figure, you can see you have your user documents or user chunks, and you can do some kind of filtering and inspire the system by existing user questions and context retrieved, and ask it to generate realistic questions for these chunks or for the representative chunks. And they show in this very nice graph, what we've also seen in practice is that you have the real queries and you have synthetic queries, and systems generally tend to have the same trend line, which system is preferred.
Yeah. and obviously with the synthetic queries, you can kind of steer the data collection in directions which are interesting from a usage point of view.
Exactly. Yeah, and this is also a very nice way to close this webinar is by also shouting out this paper called Fresh Tech by London and others from Waterloo and Databricks. I really like this quote from the beginning, saying that RAG is an approach rather than a problem. So if you just benchmark on a data set, questions and documents where the answer is easily found, then you don't really have the real problem of RAG where you don't know if the answer is there. You just try to piece up information. And this is how they came with this way of generating benchmarks based on only the corpus or documents from a collection. So they have this really nice infographic where you have your corpus. For their case, it was just a Stack Overflow where they collected questions and answers. Then you just identify documents that are relevant to you. So you just create a huge corpus of documents. This could be GitHub repositories, this could be proprietary data, and so on. Then you ask a language model to nuggetize it, which means extract information both from the question and from the answer and use this as retrieval units. And then you retrieve based on those, and you see if the final answer or the retrieved documents are grounded into the or answer the questions from the nuggets. And this is kind of what they propose to generate questions basically from an existing corpus. And I wanted to highlight here two things. So first, they show that just by creating sub-questions, by taking a language model and splitting a difficult question into parts, this performs better than hide, which is to generate a synthetic answer to the document, to the question, and search with this. And also what I found really interesting here is that they claim that searching with these LLM extracted nuggets and then composing the answer based on the results, this performs better than just searching by the true full answer to the original document. So I think this is a really nice work and worth checking out.
Not by a bunch of fresh first-year PhD students.
That's for sure.
A couple of celebrities right there on this list as well. All right, so we want to end this webinar with a little bit of news or gossip. So OpenAI has a new CEO. Well,
I wouldn't call her that.
No,
not officially.
So this lady is one of the true power ladies of Silicon Valley. She started at Facebook and was until very recently the CEO of Instacart. And now she is hired as OpenAI's new head of applications, reporting to Sam Altman. But what is an application?
Everything,
except for data centers and research and strategy, maybe.
Security.
So let me kind of brings me back to MCP somehow.
Come back.
Going from Instacart, right? It's a grocery delivery service to OpenAI. What does that mean? Well, just built an MCP server around Instacart, and now you can ask ChatGPT to deliver your groceries.
Make your groceries for you. Yeah.
I think that will happen very soon. With that, we thank you for joining us on this Trends in AI webinar. We're Zeta Alpha, AI for knowledge to discover and organize proprietary expertise in high-tech companies. You can meet us next in early June at the AI Summit. We might do a version of this webinar from there in London. That's 11-12 June. It's a pretty big AI show. And we close with our calling, enjoy discovery, and see you next time. Thanks.
Thank you for joining us.
Bye-bye.
See you next time.